I've got my own history. I've got my own worldview. And I want to walk alongside these people who are healing. Then they enter into co-empowering relationships. And that co-empowering relationship, I think, is where the magic happens in healing. So that's one of the biggest stigmas, is the person who's experiencing it claiming an identity of this.
Awekenge, this is Mental Mythos, hosted by Asekho Toto.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Mental Mythos. I'm your host, Asekho Toto, and before we dive into today's incredible conversation, I have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy what you hear today, please take a moment to rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but also helps others discover the valuable insights we share every week. And if you find today's episode particularly inspiring or insightful, don't forget to share it with your friends, family, or anyone you think could benefit from it. Thank you for your support. It truly means the world to us. Now, let's get back into our conversation.
Can you start by telling us a little about yourself and what happened actually to you in terms of, you mentioned that you are a human trafficker survivor.
Absolutely. I am Jenny Sue. So thank you so much for allowing me to share space and time with you. I'm excited to have this conversation. Before I go into my history and story, I would like to just offer a content warning for any of your listeners. Some of what I'll be talking about is my experience having survived human trafficking. I'll try to keep it very PG, because going into the gory details doesn't really serve your audience or me. But I just wanted to throw that out there in case people are listening in their cars with their kids, or that they have the space and margin that they need to stay in a place that feels healthy and resilient for them. So with that being said, I am Jenny Sue Jessen, and I am a survivor of trafficking. I grew up in the U.S., in the Midwest, in southern Missouri, and my grandfather, unfortunately, was a wicked bad guy. And so he started selling me to other men for sex at the age of 4. And so at the age of 4, my world turned upside down and inside out. By the time I was in kindergarten, I was already praying every night that God would just let me die. And so that would be the first baby version of suicidal ideation, right? I just desperately wanted to escape. And the only way I could imagine it as a 5-year-old was for Jesus to take me to heaven, to get me out of here, get me off this planet. In 2nd grade, I went to church with my grandfather. My grandfather was an elder or deacon in his church, and sat behind the man who had paid to rape me the night before. And so my growing up years were filled with all kinds of brutality. And there's certainly consequences to that. There's physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual consequences to that, some of which continue to impact me. But one of the things that I've brought forward from that is that I don't believe that trauma defines us. I believe that it equips us. There are all of these beautiful lessons that we learn in surviving, and as our body strives to heal, that not only carry significant impact for our own selves and our mental well-being and spiritual and emotional well-being, but also for our community and the people that we interact with. And so that's what I'm most passionate about, rather than the gory details, is the joy that comes from living a purpose that is equipped by trauma. So my exploitation continued until I was 17 years old. And God provided for my rescue escape at 17, the day after a failed suicide attempt. And there's been a lot of journey since then. I'm sure we're going to explore some of it. But that's the thumbnail sketch of where I come from for this conversation with you today.
You mentioned some things that I believe that we cannot ignore in terms of suicidal ideations at the age of 4. That I can only imagine how that felt in terms of imagine being 4 and having these things of clearly you didn't know what in a way that they meant in terms of killing yourself, of not realizing the consequences of killing yourself, of as much as you had this certain person that you trusted, a family member, on top of that,
Right.
of selling you. And I believe that there's this quote where it says, the most people that hurt us are the people that we most love. And in this context, it was your grandfather. Someone I would assume that someone that you didn't expect that they would do this to you. And in terms of trauma works in different ways, I would say. As much as something bad might happen to you, but it really brings that thing of purpose, and it pushes you to, in a way, create an awareness, have this certain purpose of you are destined to do this in a way. Because the reason why I'm saying this is the fact that same I would say that I also experienced trauma, whereas in some point that I started talking about it, and it wasn't hard. It wasn't easy to talk about it. It was actually hard, not realizing, having those meltdowns whenever I spoke about it, whereas not knowing how to feel, because in a way I didn't know what was meant by mental health, what was meant by mental well-being, what is that? I just thought that it's just a feeling. It's just something that I don't know, because I grew up in a community whereas we don't talk about these things, not realizing that what is suicidal ideations in terms of that. So going back to your story, when you finally, I would say, escaped your grandfather in terms of this thing of being human trafficked, looking back, how did you feel in terms of mentality? Did you take a step and look back and realize and had those breakdowns of saying that, oh, look, I suffered this, and most of the time, as much as you survived from the age of 4 until the age of 17, and realizing that you experienced all those things, did those suicidal ideations come back?
Yeah, I would say my process of healing has been long and sometimes tedious. It takes much longer and is messier than I would like for it to be. However, it is entirely possible. Yes, I struggled during the years of exploitation. I certainly struggled with suicidal ideation, some self-harm behaviors. I was clinically anorexic and got down to about 89 pounds, trying to starve myself to death. I had several coping strategies that served a purpose at the time, but weren't really healthy or functional after I was free from exploitation. But after being free and in therapeutic environments, certainly I've been diagnosed with clinical anxiety, clinical depression, complex PTSD, some identity disorders. All of that has been part of the diagnoses I've received over years. But the thing that has become really the place that I land and come back to again and again is the idea that we're designed to heal. We know that about our body. Like if you look at a child a little boy in New York City, 3-year-old little boy running through Central Park chasing pigeons. He falls and skins his knee, and it's all bloody because he hurt his knee, right? And if you imagine a little boy, 3 years old, in a village in Ethiopia, herding sheep with his family, and he's running behind the sheep and he falls and he scrapes his knee, he's going to cry. It's going to be a bloody mess. And if you think about a child maybe in India, a little girl going down to the river, washing clothes with her mom, she falls and scrapes her knee. Now, this little girl in India, the little boy in Ethiopia, the little boy in Central Park, they're different ethnicities, they're different cultures, they're different languages, they have different parents, but their scraped knee is going to heal. Why? Because it's designed to heal. None of those 3 children is going to sit down on the ground and think white blood cells, white blood cells, white blood cells to fight an infection. None of them is going to meditate and draw in platelets to make a scab. The scraped knee heals because it's designed to heal. And I have come to believe that our mental health is exactly the same. That when I'm experiencing anxiety, or when I'm experiencing depression, or when I'm experiencing suicidal ideation, that is the result of my body responding to thoughts playing in my head. For example, 17, planning, trying, and failing to commit suicide. I was thinking the story that was playing in my mind is there's been 14 years of this and there is no escape. There is no hope for any life other than this, and I can't do this another day. That's a story playing in my head that drove my actions to try to complete my suicide. And so I would argue that our mental health is as resilient and as perfectly designed as our physical physiology. We're designed to heal. And when I'm feeling uncomfortable or achy or itchy or ouchy, it's because of a story that's playing in my head. Now, for me, you might imagine, I have a lot of really traumatic memories, right? And if I get triggered and one of these memories flashes, my body is going to respond as if it's happening right now. That's kind of what goes along with PTSD, right? You're in a perfectly safe environment, but you look around and you're reacting as if you're in a traumatic scenario. Why? Because a memory flashed, my thoughts jumped into that scenario. My brain cannot differentiate past, present, and future. My brain believes it's happening right now. So it activates my body to survive, fight, flight, or freeze. And what's beautiful about that, this understanding for me at least, I don't know if it'll resonate with you, but for me is that, so when I get triggered and I have that big reaction, I can take a deep breath and go, absolutely, look how fearfully and wonderfully my body is designed. I just released every chemical I need to fight or flee or freeze to survive unthinkable trauma. And being reminded of what I've been through no longer is a bad thing. It is proof, it's evidence of what I've been through and survived and what the human body and spirit and mind is capable of.
And I would say that in a way I agree with you, but I have a different perspective in terms of that.
Tell me.
I have this thing of whatever happens to me happens for a reason. That's how in terms of, as much as this certain thing might be terrible in terms of may cause me trauma, for example, then we talk about grief. And I have lost so many people that were very close to me. And at some point, as much as I should have tried in terms of why God take these certain people within my life, I realized that that thing will happen for a reason. And for that reason, of being me, of just being able to console someone else in terms of when they come across grief and say that it's gonna be all right. And I feel like as much as it is cliche that phrase is gonna be all right, it's gonna be all right because I have seen it within my life in terms of I have lost people, I have been sad about it, I have cried about it at someone that is not. I don't usually cry in a way, but there's also one time whereas I cried when it came. I cried, and what in terms of this year taught me doing this occasionally, and it taught me that as much as you have this trauma, use that pain to just encourage people in terms of it's not over. And as much as this thing that I'm gonna say is cliche, there is the light at the end of the tunnel. Some people might not believe it that because they are so in positions that I would say that are very difficult. As you've said, that the brain is very resilient when it comes to mental health. That's the thing. I feel like also it goes with perspective of how you see things. As much as you grow up in a certain environment, but you can change your perspective of having sometimes going to and I would say that something that people wouldn't agree with also that sometimes being delusional in a sense of that there, as I've mentioned, that there's the end of the tunnel, that at the end of the day Shia LaBeouf said that if at the end it's going to be all right. If it's not the end, if it's not all right, it's not the end, and
it's not the end. Mm-hmm.
Actually, I 100% agree with that because it shows that the struggles that you are feeling now, later on, you will reap fruits that will make you happy. And I just wanna go deeply in terms of healing. Healing is something that we don't see when we're struggling. Something that we don't even consider in terms of that. We always feel we in the state of, I'm going through a lot. I don't know what to do in terms of those things. What was your turning point in terms of you want to try healing, and whenever that you had difficulties of finding that healing, what was your general thought? What was something that moved you on, keep on pursuing healing?
Yeah, I would say, well, first my default, I would credit faith. I have a belief in God, and Jesus has met me in some really incredible ways. Beyond that, though, what I have learned, certainly in the mental health realm, is that we're always journeying towards wellness. And so I have come to believe that humans aren't broken. Objects get broken and objects need to be fixed, right? I could drop a glass on my floor, it would shatter. It would have to be swept up and put in the trash if it couldn't be repaired. Objects get broken, but humans, we get wounded and we're in need of healing. And with healing, we need, if I broke my leg, I might have to go to the doctor and have a cast put on my leg. But the cast doesn't heal my leg. The cast holds my leg still while the bones heal themselves because they're designed to heal. And the same has been true for my mental health. I've certainly participated in therapeutic environments and group therapy, and they have been beneficial, certainly at different parts of my journey. I'm deeply grateful for the things that I've learned there. But what those did was they provided a structure, like a cast supporting the broken bone. They support me while I'm healing because I'm not broken, I'm just wounded. And when I start recognizing that these symptoms that I'm manifesting of anxiety or depression or grief or shame, if I'm manifesting behaviors like self-harm or suicidal ideation, those are all evidence that my brain and body is working exactly like it was designed to. I feel grief because this thing happened that was grievous. I feel rage because I was silenced, and it's appropriate to raise rage against it. And so when I started looking at the symptoms that I was experiencing, are they uncomfortable? Absolutely. Do they need to be managed? Yes. But when I started looking at the symptoms not as proof of brokenness, but instead proof of resilience, everything flipped on its head. And my healing journey became so much easier to keep moving forward, because every time I got hit with these yucky feelings, this overwhelm, this despondency, I recognize, like, yeah, that is a completely reasonable, oh my gosh, sorry.
Okay, no problem.
That is a completely reasonable reaction to what I've experienced. That's a healthy reaction to what I've been through. And also, I'm not in that space anymore. Whatever that event was happened 30 years ago, 40 years ago. It's a long, long time gone. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but that would be.
It actually does. It goes back to that quote in terms of, it's not about what happened to you, it's about how you respond towards it. And also, as I've said, it's all about perspective of trying to figure out, how would I get out of the situation? How can I better myself? And how can I find healing? How do I take those necessary steps? Because healing it's a difficult thing to do when you have a different perspective towards it, when you are not used of seeing it. Something that I've seen within myself, that at first I didn't know about healing, when I started this podcast, it was very difficult, I'm not gonna lie. And I didn't know what to say, what to talk about. I didn't know who should I invite on the guest or on the podcast. I didn't know even what it really meant when it came to resilience and being able to take care of yourself, and this thing that I'm talking about today in terms of when it comes to perspective. So as I mentioned, that we cannot talk about these two conversations, human trafficking and mental health, without involving the policies and legislations, because that's where real change happens. As much as we could advocate and say, you should talk more about mental health, we should talk about more about combating human trafficking. But if we don't enforce those policies, if we don't in a way push the leaders up there of saying that we should change these policies, we should include people with mental health in terms of trying to create that inclusivity. So you've been in shaping federal counter trafficking policies. Can you elaborate on a specific policy or initiative that you believe has made a significant impact, and how did you contribute to its development?
Yes. So I had the honor and privilege of being appointed by the President of the United States to serve a 2-year term on what's called the U.S. Advisory Council on Human Trafficking. And I was part of a cohort of 11 survivor leaders. And we regularly met with the senior policy advisors to the President's cabinet to explore what federal policies existed and how to better implement them or create new policies that would better fight against exploitation. And so it was an incredible journey. It was really, really powerful. There were two focuses or foci, two things that I particularly focused on. And one was child exploitation, certainly based from my history. And another one was the links between pornography and exploitation. it surprises many people to know that we have obscenity laws on the books in the US that actually functionally make all pornography illegal online, in print. It's actually illegal, but there's nobody enforcing those laws. And a lot of people think, well, pornography, it's just normal. It's what people do. It's not a thing. It's a victimless crime if it is a crime. But what we find in human trafficking is that pornography is the marketing department for human trafficking. And there is no way to tell by viewing the person on the screen whether they are exploited or not, whether they're trafficked or not, whether they've given their consent or not. We have lots and lots of resources, interviews with people who were performers in the past. And regularly, they had given consent to be in a particular scene or a particular scenario. But then when they got on set, the script and the director changed the game and said, no, this is what you're going to be doing. And they were things specifically that the performer objected to or said she would or he would never, ever do. But at that point, the director and the agent say, well, if you don't do this, you have to pay for this whole day of production because everybody's here and we can't produce because you are not upholding your contract. So through coercion, this performer is forced to perform sex acts that they did not consent to. So exploitation and pornography are intrinsically linked. And because we have the laws on the books, and these laws have been argued all the way up to and through the Supreme Court and affirmed, but are not being enforced anywhere, that was kind of where I put my flag in the stand. We have to be better about how we handle our cultural engagement in pornography. We agree pretty much across the board. There's very few districts that prostitution is legal. However, pornography is just prostitution on film. Prostitution, right, is an exchange of something of value for sex. Primarily, usually money for sex. Pornography is somebody receiving money for sex with a camera in the room. So they're the same. It's the same. And again, becomes the marketing department for exploitation. And why I'm so passionate about it is because we don't have any robust ways to enforce the laws that we have on the books. The age of exploitation continues to get younger and younger. And with the advent of the internet and how easy it is to access illicit material, children are being exposed to pornographic images, I think on average at about 8 years old now. And very soon after then, they meet people online and are coaxed or coerced into sending explicit images of themselves. We call it self-generated child sex abuse material. So we have children being wooed and won and romanced by perpetrators online and then being exploited by those people. So on the U.S. Advisory Council, that was really the area that I focused and ran on, made really strong arguments about, some of which have been implemented and many of which not yet. I'm still in the background now. I'm no longer on the council, but in the background, continuing to advocate for safer measures online, child protection measures, things that don't compromise individuals' security or autonomy or anonymity, but also intervene in ways that are strategic so that it protects children from being exploited.
That's quite interesting because I, in a way, I've seen that, in terms of people that are actually in the field of fighting these things, and these companies keep on just producing their content when it comes to pornography. And one thing that I've realized when it comes to these kind of policies, government don't take them very seriously because in a way they just want to be convinced in such extent. And it goes back to that thing of until it happens to you, that's where you will want to make that change. And something that government officials don't even try to look at because it won't benefit them. That's what I've seen when it comes to politics, the fact that if you come with with an issue that you want to change, these legislations, and it must be something that they will benefit financially. That's how I've seen it.
Right.
I feel like
Right.
that's why, as people who advocate for such things, we need to keep on pressing on them. As much as you're at a background now, I think that's where you have much power. That's where you are able to be not being censored in a way of trying to sort out things that are really in a way damaging the youth, and also in terms of trying to avoid that thing of perpetrators or lowering children, because that's how they in a way target, most of the time they target the young children. And a sad part that I've seen in general in America is that thing of trying to justify, actually some psychologists, I would say scientists, try to adjust to, I would say, justifying that thing of pedophilia, that realizing that it's a mental health thing. How how can it be a mental health thing, whereas it a cost of a child? Because I believe that
Right.
children are our future, and that's where we should start embrace in terms of protecting them. How can we allow children to be victims and expect them to be the next leader, expect them to be people that will make that change? So I really struggled in terms of that. And my second question, my follow-up question, I think you have answered it already in terms of the challenge that you face. You mentioned them. And I just wanna, in terms of misconceptions, definitely people out there have misconceptions about being a traffic human trafficking survivor. So, what are some misconceptions that you have come across in your journey of advocating for 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 survivors?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think one of the big things to overcome is the stigma associated with trafficking, is that when we hear about it, it causes us to be motivated to make a difference. And that's a good and a righteous thing. And I'm super, super glad for that. However, when we're motivated to enter in and make a difference, it often comes from this hierarchical position of, I'm going to ride in on my white horse and I'm going to come to the rescue and I'm going to save this poor, pitiful victim.
Mm.
And it's tragically not effective. So the stigma is that, and I think it's both for people who want to get involved in trafficking or counter trafficking, and for individuals that have experienced trafficking, is this savior victim mentality.
Mm.
Like, because I have been victimized, suddenly I own an identity of I am a victim.
Mm.
And that makes my head want to explode. And it took me a long time to overcome it. And eventually I transitioned to, okay, I am not a victim. I am a survivor. But again, that's an identity based on something horrific that happened to me. And if I just met you on the street, I don't want to be known by the worst thing that's ever happened to me. I'm not going to wear a, hello, my name is Jenny Sue. I was raped for profit for 14 years. That's not on my name tag. That's not who I am as a human. It's an experience that I've had. So when individuals who have experienced trauma, like trafficking or some other thing, recognize that it's an experience, not an identity. It's profoundly healing. And the same goes for those that are motivated to intervene. When they recognize, you know what, I'm not a savior. I'm not even a little s savior coming in to save this poor, pitiful victim. And maybe we can get them to a minimum wage job, but they're probably going to be an addict, or they're probably going to experience homelessness. That is not an empowering mindset. And when they recognize that, hey, you know what? I've got my own trauma. I've got my own history. I've got my own worldview. And I want to walk alongside these people who are healing. Then they enter into co-empowering relationships. And that co-empowering relationship, I think, is where the magic happens in healing. So that's one of the biggest stigmas, is the person who's experiencing it claiming an identity of this experience. I am a ... Or the person who's the hero that wants to swoop in and save the day, claiming that as an identity, rather than understanding like we're all human and we all experience wounds, and how do we collectively find healing together? Because when that happens, all boats rise with the tide. Right? If this individual is finding healing and I'm walking alongside them, then I'm going to experience healing, and together we're going to keep rising. And that is, I think, the beauty of what comes with counter trafficking work. The other major stigma that I would like to point out, and then we'll go back to your next questions, but is that we always think it only happens somewhere out there, over there. And the reality is, it is happening in every country in the world. It absolutely is happening out there, over there, but it's also happening in every state in the US, in every city in the US. It's happening in our neighborhoods. It's happening next door. It's happening in our schools. A lot of the children that are being victimized are in our foster care system, and they have experienced trafficking before coming into foster care or during their experience in foster care. And so it's happening all around us. And that is one of the big, big misconceptions. And it happens all around us because trafficking is facilitated through people we trust. The vast majority of those that are exploited were initially sexually assaulted and or exploited by a family member or somebody that they loved.
And something that you really touched on important things, whereas you mentioned the savior concept of, it goes back to also in mental health. People think that as you said, that in terms of you are broken, people think that you are broken, that you need their help, not realizing that most of the time when it comes to that concept, people tend to think that they want to help, but at the same time they don't want to listen to you, what you have to say, how you actually feel. And I did a course on psychotherapy, whereas it really opened my eyes in a way of, sometimes, as much as we individuals, we think that people need advices when they go through something. Just because you went through that certain thing also, that doesn't give you the right to give an advice to that certain person. Because in a way, that certain person sees it as you are not acknowledging their feelings. You are not acknowledging what actually happened to them. And I feel like I see that very complex thing, and also it's something that I just, the quote that I wrote it down, where you said it's an experience, not an identity. And it goes back to that thing of people taking that, what happened to them, and make it their whole identity. That's where I believe that's where low self-esteem comes from. That's where those suicidal ideations come from. That's where those suicide attempts come from. It's something that I believe that as individuals we need to take a look at and try by any means to advocate out that thing of telling them it's an experience, not your identity. Try to detach yourself from that. And as much as I've spoken about in terms of giving advice, but I feel like we need to have that firm hand in terms of telling people that as much as we went through this, you don't have any choice but to heal. If you don't heal, you'll be stuck here and you will end up trying to kill yourself and not realizing that you're leaving important people behind and people that love you. And to touch on the final point that you said is the fact that sometimes these things happen, human trafficking happens, as you said, in a neighborhood. The most part as within your family as something that happened to you. So as I've said, something that someone that you didn't even think that would do such a thing to you. And it's quite remarkable of how you have told your story in terms of having that edge, having that confidence of talking about it. And in terms of trauma's resilience, and as someone who is an advocate, a big advocate on the conversation, how do you maintain that sensitivity when you tell your story, when you advocate about for other survivors?
How do I maintain my how do I maintain my sensitivity for other people without being like overwhelmed by it or triggered by it? Is that what you mean?
In terms of other people being triggered, as currently people are easily triggered because they are very afraid of the conversations like these ones, being able to be opened about your story, being open about how you actually felt when it came to mental.
Yeah, I love working with people like that because when I see them having a big emotional reaction, then I can affirm, look, I'm telling you this story and look at the reaction you're having. That tells me your brain and body is perfectly in sync and you are absolutely equipped to overcome every challenge that comes your way. And then I do some fun exercises. Like I ask them, tell me, when was the last time you laughed until you cried? And they'll search their memory. Maybe it was like years ago, or maybe it was yesterday, but they'll search their memory. And as they locate that memory and they start telling me the story, do you know what's going to happen? They're going to begin to smile. And then as they continue telling the story, they're going to begin to laugh. And as they begin to laugh, I'm going to mirror them because that's how my brain works. And I'm going to begin to laugh. And I'm going to use that as, look, what just happened. First, we had this really difficult story and your body responded with all the stress chemicals. And then I asked you to tell me the story of joy and your body released all these happiness chemicals. Our emotional state follows our thoughts. And once we recognize that, thoughts just come through 24/7 all the time. We're awake, we're asleep. If we're asleep, we call them dreams. If we have a bad dream, we call it a nightmare. If you wake up from a nightmare, your heart might be racing, you might be sweating, your hair might be on end. You sit up breathless and you recognize, oh, I'm in bed, I'm safe. And immediately you start calming down because your body was reacting to a thought, a dream. And when that happens during the day, I call them daymares sometimes. Thought comes in and it's a really scary thought. And I have all the big reaction. And I go, oh, wait, that's not happening now. That's just a thought. And my body, my emotional state's going to follow my thoughts. And my thoughts are always changing. Even when I was experiencing clinical depression, I wasn't depressed all 24 hours every day. I would sleep at least 6 to 8 hours. I wasn't depressed then. I might be at the market and see a little person dancing in the aisle or smile and wave at me. And immediately I would smile back and I would have a moment, maybe 30 seconds of not being depressed, right? It's not an identity. Our mental health is not an identity. It's an experience we're having, and it's an experience that's directly linked to our thoughts.
And I would like to say thank you so much. Actually, I'm seeing the time now. I think
we went over time, I think.
Yeah, we went overboard. But at the same time, thank you so much for being here. And I really enjoyed the conversation. It really showed me a different perspective. As much as sometimes we ignore the fact of mental health within the experiences that we stumble upon. For example, for someone that is in terms of being a survivor, probably listening to this podcast, didn't know that in terms of it's all about perspective as much as that experience really shaped their lives, but that doesn't mean it's their identity. So you really touched on a very important point, and I really appreciate you for being here and for your time and for sharing your story. It's quite a big thing of sharing your story. I believe that through sharing our stories, we influence people to share also their stories of not feeling ashamed of something. Because I also believe that if I see someone sharing their story and they are not laughed at and they are brave about it, I'll be easily influenced of telling also my story of what happened actually to me. And we create that safe environment within the society, within our communities to be able, no, let's sit down and talk about these things. Maybe we'll come with a solution towards that. So again, thank you so much for sharing this story.